Good morning. Welcome to this meeting of Mayor's Question Time, which is to agree the final draft budget for the ensuing year. Are there any apologies for absence?
None received, Jim.
Thank you very much. We have in the gallery today members of the West Midlands Combined Authority coming here to see how it works, or possibly not. Or not. And we also have journalism students from Lambeth College. Welcome. Right, okay. Will you please note the recommendations set out in item 2, and do members have any declarations of interest relevant to the items on the agenda? Thank you very much. Will you please agree the minutes of the plenary meeting held on the 25th of January? Right, thank you very much. Right, I have to read out some boring instructions here. Further to Standing Order 6.4, this meeting will be used principally to consider the Mayor of London's 2017-18 Final Draft Consolidated Budget proposals. I will begin by asking the Mayor to present his final draft budget proposals, focusing in particular on the changes to the budget proposals since they were last presented to the Assembly on the 25th of January. The Assembly will then put questions to the Mayor on the budget proposals for up to 1 hour, and finally we'll move on to debate and vote on the budget proposals. The Assembly's consideration of the final draft consolidated budget is covered by the budget procedure set out in Standing Order 6. Mr. Mayor, please present your final budget proposals.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to today present the final draft of my first budget as Mayor of London. This budget lays out my plans to ensure that all Londoners get the opportunities that our city gave to me and to deliver on my promise to be a mayor for all Londoners. This is a budget specifically designed to deliver real results for Londoners and fast. This budget will deliver a record-breaking £3.15 billion in new, genuinely affordable homes over the next 5 years. The first step on the long road to fixing London's housing crisis. It'll make commuting in London more affordable by freezing all TfL fares for 4 years and continuing with the new Hopper bus fare. It sets out my intention to do everything possible to maintain the strategic target of 32,000 police officers across London and to improve neighbourhood policing in the face of significant government cuts. It sets out our ambitious plans to tackle air pollution in London, doubling the amount spent on improving air quality to £875 million. It includes significant investment in modernising our transport infrastructure, with the biggest growth in tube capacity that London has ever seen. And it includes an additional commitment of £4 million for culture, plans for a new Skills for Londoners task force, ambitious plans to make walking and cycling easier and safer, and a new target for a fire engine to reach any incident within 10 minutes, 90% of the time. Of course, achieving all this in the face of government cuts will require some extremely difficult decisions. And I want to be clear, I will not tolerate inefficiency with public money. I want to take a moment to thank Assembly members from all parties for your involvement in the budget process. I particularly want to thank Assemblymember Bacon and the Budget and Performance Committee for your pre-budget report and continued engagement. We've made changes as a result of your work and scrutiny. For example, as a result of our discussion at the committee, I've increased the contingency budget for Old Oak and Park Rural Development Corporation, OPDC, from £1 million to £2 million. If the full contingency is used, it means I've now allocated to OPDC the full amount that was initially requested from me in this budget round. As the Chief Executive of OPDC has confirmed, the additional contingency will future-proof the future delivery of the whole site. I'll also ensure OPDC works closely with Homes for Londoners, where my expert team are bringing together all my housing, planning, funding and land powers to ensure effective and efficient delivery of thousands of new homes and jobs. I'd like to thank Assemblymember Duval and the Labour Group for their representations of my budget in a number of crucial areas. As a result, I can confirm that we will be including new targeted programmes and piloting initiatives designed to help address the chronic shortage of affordable childcare in London, supporting provision for English as a second language training, and establishing a new team to target broadband not spots. And I'm pleased to confirm that the first new London food strategy in a decade will be published, and new programmes targeting holiday hunger and food poverty will be rolled out. Addressing the city's affordable housing problems is a major focus of my mayoralty, and I know that Assembly members share my concern. Assemblymember Copley has been particularly energetic in pressing me on the role that community-led housing can play. I've listened to his persuasive representations on this matter, as well as those from a range of groups involved in community-led housing. I want to make sure we are building capacity in this field. So my team has been working on proposals included in this budget for £250,000 to go towards establishing and running a community-led housing hub. This hub will support groups in areas where they may currently lack expertise, such as development management and securing funding for land. Finally, as is always the case, there are some changes to the final draft of the budget. I have further increased funding to MOPAC by a total of £3.6 million. I've more than compensated for the reduction in the Home Office's General Policing grant, and am determined to do all I can to keep Londoners safe. And I reiterate my call to all Assembly members to join me in calling on the government to properly fund policing in London. I'm also pleased to say we've now allocated the £500,000 released by Assembly members from your one-off reserve. £250,000 will be used by MOPAC to fund a major new anti-knife crime campaign, a growing problem and a tragedy that we simply must tackle. I've allocated £128,000 to fund a new musical scholarship in every London borough through the Mayor's Music Fund, and I've allocated £122,000 towards a new programme to tackle air pollution in London. So thank you again for your contribution to the budget process. This is a budget that will deliver real results for all Londoners, and I look forward to answering your questions, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members will now put questions to the Mayor seeking an update or clarification on matters relating to the final draft consolidated budget. And the first question comes from Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Mayor, good morning. Excuse me. My question relates to the Mayor's Care and Support Specialised Housing Fund. There was a significant underspend in that fund under your predecessor. Could you tell me how you intend to accelerate the delivery of supported housing and turning around this underspend?
Thanks for raising this, Senator Member Copley. There are undoubtedly significant challenges to the delivery of supported housing, including, if we're candid, through uncertain treatment through welfare reform, shrinking levels of revenue subsidy from local authorities, and rising costs of development and management. These factors are largely outside of my control, but delivery has not been helped by inflexible programme rules and a passive approach of waiting for partners to bid for schemes. I'm addressing both of these concerns by looking to fund supported housing from my main affordable housing programme. This more flexible approach, which could see schemes funded that do not fit within rules of other government programmes, should increase delivery, which I know you're keen to see. I also wish to adopt a more proactive approach to commissioning supported housing schemes to meet known needs. And in order to support this, I have adjusted responsibilities so that it now sits within the team that commissioned my pan-London services to tackle rough sleeping.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. In our London Assembly Housing Committee report, Supported Housing in the Balance, we call for better promotion of the fund to partners, more flexibility in the conditions applied to capital grant to encourage innovation, and more agile provision. How will the GLA be actively promoting the fund and negotiated grants rates as bid submissions come forward under the Homes for Londoners framework in 2017?
So what we're doing is deliberately making sure that we're funding housing support from the main affordable housing programme. It's not going to be in an extra somewhere else. And that flexible approach will mean that where there is difficulty finding funding from government schemes and schemes from local authorities, we'll be able to step in, hopefully. Homes for London is really important, bringing together the different branches of GLA housing, from land, from housing, from planning, with a group of experts. And the key thing is this: you will know that the need for supported housing is going up in London. Housing associations have a role to play, but with the best will in the world, unless they've got resources to help them, they can't deliver some additional need that we need. And I'm hoping this flexible, pragmatic approach will help address the fact that, as you said, these have been underspent in the last few years.
In December, your Deputy Mayor, James Murray, said he would be responding to the DCLG and DWP consultation on funding supported housing. Will you share the GLA submission with the London Assembly?
Happy to.
Thank you very much. That's all the questions I had on this, Mr. Mayor. Just to say as well, thank you very much for your what you said about community-led housing and the additional money for the budget.
Pleasure. Thanks, Tom, for your hard work.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. I'm just going to very quickly mention that even though it's disappointing that you haven't done more to boost youth services, I know that Assemblymember Berry's pushed you really hard on that, and it is disappointing that there hasn't been more done on that. But what I want to focus my time on is the funding for Energy for Londoners, your proposed fully licensed energy supply company. Empower are planning a 15% energy price increase from the 16th of March, and Ofgem have said they don't see any case for this hike. Now, there are 348,000 Londoners already in fuel poverty, and this price rise could push even more Londoners over the edge. So are you aware that Bristol Energy is already saving its customers an average £240 a year when they switch from the average of the Big Six standard variable tariffs to the Bristol Energy tariff?
Sure, but ours isn't off the ground yet. We're doing the work required in the lead up to that, and so there's lots of feasibility work taking place to get Energy for Londoners off the ground. So hopefully once we're off the ground, we'll try and make sure that we can learn the best from municipal energy suppliers around the country.
Okay. The background statement to your budget says that the capital programme reserve funding may be allocated to a GLA-controlled energy supply company. This is a change from the earlier version of the budget, and it's very promising, so thank you. However, your final draft budget doesn't actually include any details of the dedicated budget, and companies that, like the Bristol City Council company, they invested £1.5 million in the setup costs for their company, which is why we proposed in our budget amendment allocating that sort of sum for setting up costs for your Energy for Londoners. Is this a priority for you? When you've previously said that it is, why isn't there the actual money allocated for the setup costs in this budget?
Well, look, I mean, we're doing the work in relation to getting Energy for Londoners off the ground. In the meantime, we're dealing with fuel poverty by helping those to scrap their old boilers and get new boilers in. You'll be aware, not 1 million, but 4.5 million spent on the boiler scrappage scheme. And so fuel poverty is a big issue. Assemblymember Cooper raises every mayor's question time, I think, and we're taking steps to address that. We're doing the work to make sure we get Energy for Londoners off the ground. Shirley Rodriguez, the Deputy Mayor for Energy and Environment, is working on one environment strategy, bringing together six different policy areas into one. But obviously I'm always keen for some members with expertise to feel free to meet my Deputy Mayors to raise any issues or lobbies as and when they see fit.
You're saying at the moment then all the options, because you're currently studying different options for an energy supply company, are you saying that all the options are still open?
We need to speak to Deputy Mayor Rodriguez about this, but we're currently doing the feasibility work required to get Energy for Londoners off the ground. In the meantime, we're not sitting on our laurels. We've got a boiler scrappage scheme to address the issue of fuel poverty in the short term. So
in the June MQ meeting, we talked about your plans, and I asked you if it was going to be a fully licensed energy supply company, and you said that's the idea. So are you still committed to it being a fully licensed energy supply company?
That's the idea.
Marvellous. Okay, well, it'd be very good if you could stick to that idea, because that way you're going to get many, many more benefits for Londoners. You're going to be able to set your own tariffs, invest in renewable energy, and you'll also grow and keep energy expertise in London rather than off in other places around the country. Thank you.
Assemblymember Baker. I beg your pardon. Assemblymember Bacon.
How many years have I known you? Thank you very much. Mr Mayor, how many new staff are you going to be hiring in this financial year?
So this year of staff, as you know, is the overall parameters of the GLA and functional bodies budgets are approved in February. And then each member of group then finalise their budget plans within those parameters in March. And so that happens every year. You should know this as an experienced Assembly member, so I'm quite surprised you don't know that. And so in March we'll have a better idea once the different members of the group finalise their budget. So ask the question again post-March.
Mr Mayor, I'm very familiar with the process here, but also, as I put to you a month ago, you must have an outside edge number in your head, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to fund it. So how many people are you planning to hire?
Well, let me explain, as somebody who's experienced who should know this. We set the budget by the end of February, and you know that. So we will set the overall parameters, and then each group then uses that envelope to decide how much, how they spend it and stuff. And you'll also be aware that we'll stay within the budget. And you will know from the answer I gave at the last Mayor's question time, the last plenary session, that the Chief of Staff and Head of Paid Services are looking in some detail at the potential staffing consequences that flow. And there are three particular reviews that I mentioned last time when we discussed this, was reviewing the fixed term posts to see whether they should be extended and where we need to make these permanent, where we need new fixed term posts that deliver short term programs. There were a lot of short term progress when the previous Mayor was in place, but also reviewing new permanent posts where these may be needed. And you'll also be aware as an experienced member of the Assembly that whenever there's a change of administration, these things happen, and so I'm surprised you're surprised.
Really, Mr Mayor. You've been Mayor now for 9 months, and it is not unreasonable, as we discussed last time, for you to want to have new priorities, and that might involve new staffing, and that's fine. It might also involve terminating fixed-term contracts, or indeed extending them or making them permanent. That is fine as well. But today, we are being asked to approve your budget that will have to pay for this. It's therefore not an unreasonable question for Assembly members to at least have an idea. It doesn't have to be precise, but in ballpark terms, how many new staff you expect to be in this building during this financial year. Can you give me a number?
It will be within the spending envelope we agreed before the end of this month.
Yes, that's, of course it will, Mr Mayor, because you have to pay for it. But the point that I'm trying to get to is that, as you've gone to great lengths yourself to point this out, that times are hard, finances are being squeezed, there are pressures all over the place, we understand and know all of that, and we sympathise with all of it. The trouble is, Mr Mayor, that decisions you make around staffing, particularly about staffing increases, would obviously impact on the decisions that you have elsewhere. So the Assembly, being asked to approve your budget today, is not unreasonable in asking what your ballpark figure is likely to come down to. So what is it?
Within the spending envelope.
Within the spending envelope. So we need to understand what the trade-off is, though, Mr Mayor. If you're spending money on, let's say, 100 new staff, or 120 new staff, or whatever the figure happens to be, it means you can't spend it on other things. There's a prioritisation exercise that has to take place in any budget to do the budget setting. We need to know what that figure is. What is it?
Well, I've explained to you the way the timelines work, and again, I mean, it's good theatre, but it doesn't really help. And let me just give you just some experience of the last 17 years, examining the last 17 years. In the last 17 years, except for on 2 occasions, there had been an increase in staff over the last 17 years. And the reasons are very simple. Over the last 17 years, you've seen GLA and the Mayor be devolved more powers from central government. So it's not unreasonable if, for example, a good new Mayor has secured a record investment from central government of £3.15 billion to fix the housing crisis. It's not unreasonable not to assume we're going to raise staff in relation to helping us deliver homes for Londoners. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that I will do what previous administrations have done, which is when we get more power to increase staff. But I'm determined to make sure that we stick within the spending envelope, so you can be reassured that you aren't going to go outside the spending envelope approved this month by us.
Mr Mayor, as you know, I trust you implicitly, so reassurance is not required. It is not unreasonable, as you have just said, that there may have to be some additional staffing. We all understand and accept that. The problem is where you're continuing programmes that the previous Mayor did that maybe should be cut, and you might need new resources for other things. The point is, though, Mr Mayor, that this has been cloaked in secrecy so far. Neither you nor any of the senior officers at this building have been able to confirm or deny the rumours that are repeatedly flowing around that new space is going to be
You
required
begin
in other
most of them, to be
offices
fair.
or Union Street. Pardon me?
There's different figures each time. You begin the rumours. You sometimes say
No, Mr. Mayor, I don't.
a dozen new staff, sometimes
these numbers
100 new staff.
These numbers have been put to you. They've been put to your chief of staff. They've been put to senior officers in this building at budget scrutiny and in here, and they have not been denied by anybody. So nobody is any the wiser, Mr. Mayor. We need to understand the prioritisation that you have taken place over the last few months to put your budget together going forward, because inevitably, if you're going to be putting resources into new staffing, you're going to be taking it from somewhere else. We need some clarity on that, Mr. Mayor. So what is the number?
So the GLA and its functional bodies will have the parameters of what they can spend approved by the end of this month. And they will then make sure they don't spend above that. In addition to that, the Chief of Staff and the Head of Paid Services are looking at some detail at what additional staffing requirements we may have, bearing in mind the reviews I've talked about, the 3 different areas where there's going to be review, and bearing in mind the government has rightly devolved more powers to us and more resources to go with that.
Right, so you're either not going to tell me or you don't know.
I can answer your question in a 6th different way to the 7th question you've asked in a different way, but look, the reality is this. We are approving the budget before the end of this month. The functional bodies will then know what their spending envelope is.
I think
at the same time, the Chief of Staff and Head of Paid Services are reviewing some of the things we've talked about, and we'll have more information once they've done that.
Okay, I think we've established that you're not going to answer that question. I want to move on and talk to you about the police budget. Now, we support, I think there's a motion this afternoon which I expect to be passed unanimously, supporting your call to the government to adequately fund the Metropolitan Police, and we think that that's entirely right, and we support you on that. However, within the terms of this budget, you have chosen to cut the line that will provide for 32,000 police officers by £38 million, which reflects the current warranted police officer numbers rather than the strategic target of 32,000. Why have you done that at a time when you are negotiating with the government for a fair funding for the Metropolitan Police?
You and I both know that's nonsense.
Really?
Last year, the Mayor, against the advice of the then Home Secretary, somebody called Theresa May, rather than increasing the police precept by 1.99%, as he was advised to do, didn't simply not increase it, but he cut it. It may have been because it was an election year, and we know how that election turned out. As a consequence of his reckless decision to cut the council tax precept on policing, the current Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, wrote to me and said Londoners would suffer by a cut of approaching £18 million because of the failure of the previous mayor to make the increase of 1.99%. And by the way, because of buoyancy and future years, it could have been in subsequent years, we'd have been cut again and again and again. I've actually taken on board the warnings of the current Home Secretary. I've increased the policing precept this year by 1.99%, which roughly speaking affects, we're talking about, it's 8 pence. 8 pence a week for bandy council tax payers. In addition to that, I've increased money from the council tax buoyancy and from business rates to make sure that we can fund the right number of police officers we need. So the average number of officers over the coming year is going to be 31,300 officers, which is more than was when your guy was the mayor of London. I'm quite determined to make sure we keep Londoners safe. That's why I'm restoring neighbourhood policing. That's why I'm lobbying the government to give us the appropriate funding for NICs that we deserve, but also working with the government to make sure we get the decent funding we need. And your support would be much welcomed.
Does your budget that's being approved or not today provide for 32,000 police officers in this financial year?
We still have a strategic target of 32,000
That's not the question I asked you, Mr. Mayor.
officers.
I asked you, does your budget provide for 32,000 police officers in this
The
financial year?
last time we had 32,000 police officers
I didn't ask you that question either, Mr. Mayor. Does your budget provide for 32,000 police officers this year?
12. And you and I both know, because we've rehearsed this on at least 4 occasions.
Yes, we have.
At the
Your
Budget
answer should
Performance
be better
Committee, at Mayor's Question Time, at the last plenary. It's inconceivable, bearing in mind the turnover of 1,600 to 1,700 police officers a year. Bearing in mind there's a possibility there's
So the answer is no.
in the police funding formula going forward,
Okay.
which means we could lose up to £700 million. Bearing in mind police officers can't be made redundant. It's an academic exercise.
So the answer is no. I think that's, everyone in this room understands that. Moving on to Transport for London, Mr. Mayor, you have taken the decision to reduce reserves by just under £1.7 billion. You've increased long-term borrowing by 47%. Now, the latter point, I think most members will understand, because borrowing is relatively cheap at the moment, and borrowing is used to finance infrastructure. I think that there is some merit in that. However, you have also chosen to take funding away from various key pieces of infrastructure development that were in the previous TfL business plan, such as the Sutton Tram. Why have you decided to do that?
Another example of you talking nonsense.
So the money's in the budget for the Sutton Tram?
Let me just remind you of what used to happen every year for the last 8 years. TfL, which was good but flabby, would each year come to the previous mayor, the part-time one, and say, look, we've been inefficient but flabby. Can you increase fares by this amount to pay for our flabbiness and inefficiency? And the previous part-time mayor would agree to that and increase fares by record amounts. Over the last 8 years, we saw fares increasing by 42% to pay for inefficiencies in TfL. I, as a full-time mayor who take this seriously, have said to TfL, you've got to become efficient and provide value for money for Londoners. I'm unwilling to make Londoners pay for your inefficiencies. So we've frozen TfL fares over the next 4 years, and we've made sure TfL becomes far more efficient. For the first time in 17 years, TfL's operating expenditure has gone down rather than up. And that led me to publish a business plan, not on the back of two sides of paper in the lead up to an election, but a proper business plan which sets out how we're going to invest in TfL going forward. And by the way, biggest investment in tube growth, biggest investment in step-free access, a doubling of investment in dealing with air quality, having a full-time walking and cycling commissioner to address some of the issues that I inherited, and all the investment in whether it's Piccadilly line, it carries on within the same parameters. Elizabeth line should open.
Mr. Mayor, I specifically asked you about the Sutton Tram.
All our plans are there.
Mr. Mayor, would you answer the question about the Sutton Tram, please, because you're burning through my time here. Why have you removed the funding for the Sutton Tram?
Well, we've looked at the March 2006 business plan that you pray in aid. The March 2006 business plan, I looked at
2006?
16.
Right.
The March 2016
You misread his
plan,
handwriting.
The March 2016 business plan, which was published at the haste of the previous Mayor Boris Johnson in the space of a short number of days, I'm being told, didn't include enough funding for the Sutton Tram. It was always going to be a partnership, and Member O'Connell has raised this issue
£100 million
before.
and now includes...
And the money's available in the TfL plan. I think it's in the growth. No. In the growth.
Mr. Mayor, it's not. I have to correct you there.
It's the same, if not more.
You have attached more than a dozen projects to that TfL growth plan that you've just referred to, and there's a £200 million pot in there. So it's not in the business plan at all. They can bid for money to contribute,
be aware
but there was
that
£100 million assigned
tram
to it under your
extension
predecessor.
costs more than £200 million. Do you accept that?
Almost certainly.
Well, it does.
And there was £100 million assigned to it under your predecessor that is now zero.
And it's
Do you
a
accept
partnership between City Hall, Sutton, probably Merton and some
But you're not going to be
others.
contributing to it.
The good news is there is more than £200 million in the growth plan. The good news is, unlike the previous mayor, I've been to visit the leader of Sutton. I've been to visit Sutton. The TfL Commissioner's been there as well with the Deputy Mayor. We're working with Sutton in relation to plans going forward, but it's misleading to suggest that the previous Mayor had a fully funded plan to
I didn't
have a
suggest
Sutton
that,
Tram
Mr. Mayor.
extension.
I
You and I
suggested
both
that there
know
was
it's not
£100 million
true.
in TfL's business plan, and now there is zero.
You and I both know the previous Mayor didn't fund the Sutton Tram extension.
I
You
said
and
there was
both
£100 million
know
in the business plan,
there is
and now
more
it's
than
zero.
enough money in the growth plan.
Okay,
to
so you're evading
pay
that
for
answer as well. In TfL's budget, they are proposing to make £800 million worth of revenue savings by 2020-21. They've given a very high-level indication of 227, but nothing for the remaining almost, well, in excess of £500 million. Where's that money come from?
For the first time in 17 years, the operating expenditure of TfL is going
So you don't know?
downwards.
Okay, that's fine.
Chairman,
Chairman, I don't need to hear this
how
answer
TfL
again.
becomes
The Mayor's
far
not
more
answered
efficient.
one
All right,
of the questions I've
okay.
asked him.
Assembly Member Curtin.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, last time I did ask you about debt and the debt that the whole GLA group has, and I was quite alarmed to see that the total debt was about £17 billion, the authorised external limit. Now, out of America at the moment, one thing that does concern me are some of the things that the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen, has been saying. She's been indicating quite strongly over the last few weeks that interest rates are going to rise. Now, if they rise in the Federal Reserve in America, interest rates in the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, all over the world are likely to rise. Now, in your answer to me last time, you said interest rates are low, it is a good time to invest. But have you got any plan or contingency to cope with the situation where interest rates may rise and the expenditure on your capital financing costs on interest repayments may rise significantly as well.
The way to avoid the concerns you're expressing, which are reasonable concerns, is to, when you take out loans, the interest rate is fixed. And that, my understanding is that's exactly what we're doing.
That's fine. I mean, for the things that you've planned for this year, that's okay. But what concerns me is perhaps some of the debt that you're not responsible for, because a lot of the debt that the GLA group has been built up over 16 years before you took your office. Now, if there are, some of the debt will be on 5-year and 10-year bonds, and you'll have to roll those over this year. Do you know how much debt you're going to have to roll over, which was taken out 5 or 10 years ago, which you're not actually responsible for?
I know West Midlands are behind you. I think that's the sort of concern that local authorities all across the country would share, and so that's why we use SIPFA's borrowing guidance. SIPFA is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accountancy body, and so their borrowing guidance is, you know, live to the concerns you're articulating, and all of us, local authorities across the country, are live to those concerns to make sure we don't inadvertently, you know, take unnecessary risk. You'll know, though, of course, that actually all the indications are from experts across the world, say from the expert we refer to, that actually now is a good time to borrow. I've seen no evidence of us needing to be alarmed or concerned as a consequence, but I'm sure SIPFA and others keep it under review.
I know you did mention SIPFA last time in your answer to me. My concern is, you know, if you, for example, have to roll over £1 billion of debt, and the interest rate goes up by 1%, and that's not budgeted for, you're going to have to pay an extra £10 billion of interest on that. I mean, the total interest you have over all of the GLA groups I've calculated at 618 million. I mean, that's about 5% of the total operating budget. If it goes up by 10 billion or 10 million or 20 million, for example, you know, that's not in the calculations that SIPFA may have made. Have you done any thought to the interest repayments going forward and possibility that they might increase?
You referred to the last 16 years. I suspect Martin may have been here for a big period of that.
It's a fixed rate.
It's a fixed rate.
But if you have to roll the debt over, wouldn't you have to negotiate a new rate?
Across the group, they'll be making appropriate provision to repay debt, and therefore there's no need to sort of roll it over because you can't afford to repay the principal. So we've been very prudent over the whole 17 years.
Okay.
So the vast bulk of the debt is fixed, and provision has been made each year in accordance with the legislation to provide sufficient funds to repay that debt.
I understand that, you know, you do fix the rate of debt for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years on long-term bonds. Yeah. But, I mean, I did ask you a specific question, which I don't have a specific answer for yet. How much of the debt is going to be rolled over this year by TfL and MOPAC and the GLA, for example? I mean, I know it's only going to be a small amount of the 17 billion total debt, but will it be $1 billion or $2 billion? How much debt will be rolled over that you'll have to take out new loans on? Because if you have a 10-year bond that matures this year, you'll have to refinance that. And you may have to refinance that on a higher interest rate if the interest rates increase. That could lead to extra expenditure that's not accounted for.
Well, so, I've been asked to direct you to page number 85.
The budget documentation will list the borrowing requirements for each the GLA and each functional body in the relevant appendix for that organisation. So you can see there how much borrowing is proposed each year.
Okay, that's it. Thanks, UKIP. All over. Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Mr Mayor, between your draft and final budget, there's an additional £27.1 million. When the Commissioner has been warning about serious threats to policing around the capital, why have you made the decision not to allocate the majority of this funding to the police?
Which funding?
The additional £27.1 million from the buoyancy and council tax. Why have you decided not to allocate the majority of that to the police?
Well, the police have got the funding, so 17-18 or subsequent years?
I'm talking for this year.
So for 17-18, the police, as I've said in previous answers, we've given them additional funding from a number of sources, from business rates retained, from the buoyancy, from the 1.99% increase in council tax precept. So as far as 17-18 is concerned, you'll see the additional amount of funding we've given to the police, roughly speaking 27.8 million,
You could have put
17-18.
further money in from this additional buoyancy to really help boost police numbers, and you've chosen not to. Why?
Sorry, buoyancy from where? You mean the one?
The additional 27.1 million between the draft and final budget.
We've got to be a bit careful because there's one-off money we received for this year, and there's the fact that we need to make sure we can fund the police in recurring years going forward.
Yeah.
And so the easy thing to do is to give somebody, inverted commas, a windfall for 1 year, but then it begs the question, what will you do in subsequent years? And that's why we've made sure we can fund the police in subsequent years. There's no point doing when it comes to anything when there's a recurring expenditure. This is why the question about youth services doesn't understand that actually for youth services you could start them, but there's a recurring expenditure. Same goes with police numbers. You can't when it comes to next year in March make a police officer redundant because there's no buoyancy next year. So what I've done is a sensible thing was to make sure we fund the police this year, and that will be recurring going forward, but also lobby the government to make sure they fund the police properly, recurring year on year.
But it's perfectly reasonable to assume growth going forward in terms of the new homes you're building, so you're going to have a growth in council tax base. In terms of business rates, your vision for the city should see London growing.
Karen,
so you could have the funds to enable the Met to recruit at least 372 additional officers, yet you're choosing not to. And I don't understand why when you're making the case to government.
You're doing exactly what Assembly Member Bacon does, which is mislead the public. Look, the homes, again, it's a Tory-Liberal coalition. We saw how the country ended up with that one.
There's no need now to mislead. You don't need to mislead anybody now, Mr Mayor, because the time is up.
Oh dear.
You can't even answer the
heartbreaking,
question.
isn't it? Assembly Member Cooper.
Good morning, Mr Mayor.
Hi.
I'd like to ask you something about another very difficult area which you, and it's great to have a Labour Mayor in City Hall who's willing to take on these areas. Fuel poverty, as you just mentioned, air quality, as we've also discussed, but in this case, recycling rates, where you've also set a very ambitious target of trying to get to 65% recycling. And I just wondered if you could tell us how your budget will aim to increase recycling. It's a really difficult area because it isn't just something that City Hall is responsible for. Obviously, it's a borough issue as well.
Thanks for your question. It's just worth reminding ourselves that recycling rates have fallen for the past 2 consecutive years, another legacy of the previous guy. And the London Waste and Recycling Board is a partnership between the Mayor and London boroughs, established to improve how London's waste is managed, with a view to increasing the amount we can recycle and reuse to minimise the amount of waste London produces. I've asked my Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy to sit on the London Waste and Recycling Board, but I'm also recommending the appointment of Dr Liz Goodwin, OBE, to be my representative as Chair through the London Waste and Recycling Board, and in particular the Resource London programme. I'll help boroughs to identify the most cost-effective way to significantly increase the municipal waste recycling rate. And I'll set out the services I expect boroughs to provide in my environmental strategy as well. And I'll explore what can be done to increase the amount that businesses recycle too. It's really important we address this issue.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I mean, obviously, it is a shared effort between City Hall and the boroughs, and it's good to hear that Deputy Mayor Rodriguez is going to be sitting on the London Waste and Recycling Board. How else, in terms of increasing recycling, and it's an area that we've touched on before in terms of the circular economy, obviously, at the moment, I think the levels of reuse in London, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. How else can will your budget be assisting in moving ahead on that? Is that also going to fall into the Deputy Mayor who has responsibility for business around skills, those sorts of areas?
There's a few answers to that question. Firstly, we need to make sure the environment strategy addresses this issue. Secondly, you're right, it's a partnership between the boroughs and City Hall, but also businesses have a role to play. And so I know you're well attuned to the work we're doing around the Skills for Londoners task force, but we need to make sure that we think about innovation with the business sector as well, about reuse, recycle as well. The good news is, young Londoners get it far more than our generation did, I say, with respect to our generation. And that sort of bottom-up pressure will help as well, but also the new businesses that are starting, they get this as well in relation to the need to respect the environment. Bear in mind, we're a population that's rising. And so unless we get this right, reuse, recycle, it'll be, the next generation that has to address this issue. That's why we've got to address this now.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Member Twycross.
Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the skills for Londoners, which you mentioned in your previous response to Assembly Member Cooper. And you may be aware that TimeWise and the Learning Work Institute are working together to develop and test a model for part-time and flexible apprenticeships in London. Will your Skills for Londoners task force as proposed in the budget have scope to look at a pilot to introduce part-time apprenticeships here at the GLA?
Well, one of the things that your question alludes to is we've got to understand that actually people have different personal circumstances, and a one-size-fits-all approach won't work. And so if an apprentice wanted to work part-time, it's likely the GLA could accommodate that within the current funding rules, because there is provision for apprentices to be part-time. And the rules say if it's exceptional circumstances. Given this, at the moment, I don't see a need for the task force to look at a pilot scheme, but of course we'll keep it under review, and if it's the case that we think we need one, we'll reconsider.
Do you think that that phrase, in exceptional circumstances, might put some people off asking for the flexibility, though? Because obviously caring responsibilities aren't exceptional. So, I mean, it would be good if that could be phrased in such a way that made it very clear to people that they could ask for that flexibility.
And that's why I've said we've got to keep it under review, because I mean, the GLA apprenticeship scheme, I think we understand that you're right, you know, it could put off people if they think it's exceptional circumstances. But you're right, there may be others who may be less willing to do so and stuff. So as far as the GLA is concerned, I'm confident because of our ethos that if somebody wants to be a part-time apprentice, we can accommodate that. But I think the bigger question is, what about those people who want to be part-time apprentices for others?
Yeah.
And so I'm keeping this under review. At the moment, I've been advised there's no need to pilot it, but if it's the case we think we do, or if you've got evidence that those do, we're happy to do that. I think you're right, by the way. We can't assume that somebody who would be a part-time apprentice has the confidence to advocate for themselves. I'm an exception. And so that's why we've got to make sure our ethos encourages people to put themselves forward, but also we make the decision to allow them to be a part-time apprentice if need be.
Thank you. And what other ways would you be wanting Skills for Londoners to encourage more women with care responsibilities, people with physical or mental health disabilities, and other vulnerable people, such as vulnerable young adults, into skilled employment?
Part of it is us talent spotting. We've got to, if somebody knows somebody who is a woman or with care responsibilities who could benefit from this, encourage them to apply. Us looking for somebody who may be able to benefit. I'm a firm believer in role models, and so it's really important that when we've got a success story, we publicise that and promote that to encourage others to come forward. Don't underestimate the importance of word of mouth, but not everyone's got a social network, and so we're going to do what we can to encourage this, because there are too many Londoners who are not fulfilling their potential because of lack of opportunities being given to them. So we've got to find those hard to reach people and make sure they benefit.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Hi.
How will your budget help to address the growing concerns of child poverty and subsequent health inequalities in London?
Well, look, the manifesto that I fought the last campaign on committed me to monitoring child poverty, ensuring that effective interventions are put in place to alleviate child poverty and to help people that have to rely on food banks in order to feed their children. So we've just compiled a comprehensive overview of the various sources of available data that have indications of poverty, and this analysis will help me establish what poverty metrics are most appropriate to track those in London. You'll be aware from previous questions asked by Assembly Member Twycross about some of the concerns about the metrics and how we identify poverty. So we're doing that. Separately, the economics fairness work which we talked about previously, we're considering what more we can do to understand the causes and effects of low pay and poverty, and then make the right effective interventions. While I'm there, I've made it quite clear to the team here, the GLA will take strategic leadership on child poverty in London by engaging with stakeholders and deprived communities to ensure we know their needs and priorities. You'll be aware of the health inequalities link between social inequalities and health inequalities, and they begin in early childhood. And what happens to young children has a lifelong impact on them when they become adults, and obesity, heart disease, mental health problems. And so you won't be surprised to know, but others may be, that in London, if you're a 10 and 11-year-old Londoner, you're the most likely in the country to be overweight, with childhood obesity closely related to poverty. So my budget includes funding for the development of health inequality strategy and for a new programme to support health for all London children in schools and early years setting.
Thank you. You will know that the Royal College of Paediatricians produced a report on the state of health of children and made certain recommendations. Would you please consider those recommendations and lobby the government where appropriate to do so?
Well, let me look at them first before I lobby the government. I may not agree with them, but I'm sure I will. But let me look at the recommendations, and I'll make sure that Dr. Coffey meets with you as well to see any other things that you think we should be doing that we're not my health advisor.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Dismore.
Thank you. Given the large number of Londoners who now live abroad and the large number of EU nationals who now live in London, what are you doing to ensure their human rights are respected by the government? And will you include in your budget resources to campaign for fair treatment of EU nationals affected by Brexit? And will you also include respect for EU Londoners' human rights in your forthcoming Brexit paper?
Well, Andrew, I know your experience in this area as a former chair of the Joint Committee of Human Rights and the work we did together. You did, more importantly, leading this agenda in Parliament around human rights. You'll also be aware, others may not be aware, that today is a national day of action to celebrate the contribution of migrants to the UK. The government should secure the rights for EU nationals in the UK, but also UK nationals in the EU at an early stage. I believe the government should be doing much more to show EU nationals they're welcome here and they're welcome to stay here. And I'll be urging the government to set out the details of the reciprocal deal they're hoping to strike with the other EU member states, making it clear who would qualify to remain under such a deal, and it will be required of them to confirm their immigration status. Once this becomes clear, I will decide what City Hall can do to support EU nationals in London. I'm confident this activity can be funded from existing budgets. I'll also continue to raise these points in my regular meetings with David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, and Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, and in my response to the government's white paper, which I'll be publishing soon. And this is a dialogue I want to establish with government. It's important they fully understand how Londoners who are originally from European countries contribute to our community and economy when it comes to the government making their decisions in relation to EU negotiations.
Well, thanks for that positive answer, and I'm sure you'd agree with me that human rights are universal and should be universally respected. And you mentioned the Joint Committee on Human Rights, and they recently reported, quotes, the government seemed unacceptably reluctant to discuss the issue of human rights after Brexit. The minister responsible was either unwilling or unable to tell us what the government saw as the most significant human rights issues that would arise when the UK exits the EU. And I think the rights of the people who are here are particularly foremost. And I think that the government is probably acting in breach of Articles 8 and 14 of the European Convention towards them, irrespective of what the criteria may be. But I'm sure you will have seen, would you not, the increasing and compelling evidence that many EU nationals who've been in the UK for 5, 10, however many years, for decades some, will not currently meet the criteria for permanent residency, for example, because they were parents with career breaks and didn't have private health insurance, which they didn't need, even though they had to take out. So this has resulted in really stressful insecurity. So do you think these are important issues that you'll be pushing with the government?
Well, listen, I meet on a daily basis, I'm sure you do, Londoners, and they're Londoners, by the way, who are worried, scared, uncertain about their future in their city. It's their city as well. And I think the sooner the government gives them the certainty, the better. You can't use people as bargaining chips. You just can't. And I think the government could be doing more. They should be doing more. We'll lobby them. And I make this point. There are 8.6 million Londoners. Of the 8.6 million Londoners, 1 million, and they're Londoners, by the way, are Londoners who are originally from EU countries. And they contribute hugely to our city, socially, economically, and culturally. Some of them never bother changing their passport from a German passport to a British one, or a French to British, or Italian, or Polish. Their children are born and raised here. They go to our schools. They are quintessentially British, and yet they're uncertain about their future. My job as the mayor is to make sure the government understands that, and if the Assembly can help on a cross-party basis, all the better.
Well, thank you for that. Could I move on to a different issue now, and that's setting the policing priorities at borough level? And would you agree that it's important to get maximum buy-in to the policing and crime plan from local communities, that this means devoting sufficient resources to ensure there are well advertised meetings in all the boroughs for the public to have their chance to engage with MOPAC and the Met and to contribute their point of view as to what they think the priorities for their borough should be. So it's not just a top-down decision from MOPAC, the local authority leadership and the Met.
Can I say it's really easy to make top-down decisions, but they're usually bad ones. And so I'm clear in my mind that although it's easier to set another 7 crime types in London, I want to make sure that local boroughs have their local priorities addressed rather than a one-size-fits-all approach for London. Neighbourhood policing is flexible and adaptable by nature, and these teams will lead in local priorities. I will also include London-wide high-harm crimes that are mandatory for all areas: sexual offences, domestic abuse, child sexual exploitation, gun and knife crime. That's because these crimes are complex and important for all of us and require specialist teams, and there are budgetary savings to be made by restructuring the borough command units and back office, but these will not be affected by crime priorities and is where the real savings will be made, freeing up the capacity to deliver local borough priorities for London.
Well, thanks for that answer. And I think it is important that we recognise that where there are merged boroughs, they can have separate or different priorities. And you mentioned safer neighbourhood level priorities as well, but I'm particularly concerned about ensuring the public are involved at the borough level. I know that the Deputy Mayor has been having meetings with borough leaders and local borough commanders, and the real question is how are local people going to be able to feed into that. Now, I'm very pleased that Sophie is having a meeting tonight in Camden, to which people have been invited, though it was relatively short notice, and I think the publicity could have been rather broader. But are we going to see meetings like this in all the boroughs so that everyone gets a fair crack of the whip in contributing?
That's the idea. I mean, and Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden is getting around with the relevant senior police officer Martin Hewlett as well. They're trying to get across London. We're a big city, as you know.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask for very quickly a bit of clarification on the 250,000 for community-led housing hub that you talked about in your introduction. It wasn't in your press release today, but I know that boroughs will find this very good news. They are probably going to help them access the second half of the government's £2.3 million community housing fund allocated to London. But is this new money? Is this within the £1 million community-led housing budget line that you have? Or is this maybe new money coming out of the new capital programme reserve, as our amendment proposes? Obviously, very happy for you to say it was entirely your idea as long as you do it, but is it new money or not?
Well, to be fair, it was Tom's idea. But the GLA budget within the Homes for Londoners programme contains provision for £250,000 of revenue funding towards the establishing and running of a community-led housing hub over a 3-year period. I've got whole terms of reference which I'm happy to send.
Is that within the £1 million budget line that's on page 47 of your budget, 81 of your budget now?
Whilst they're checking that, you can ask me another question.
Okay, thanks very much. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr Mayor.
Hiya.
Can I ask you, Mr Mayor, I know that last time I asked you this question, you looked a bit like a rabbit in the headlights and you denied all knowledge about your fake promise to reduce bus fares in the first year. I don't know if you've now had time to look at your website, which is www.sadiq.london/transport, your election website. Can you tell the people of London why there is no budget proposal to cut bus fares as you promised on your website in the first year?
I was quite clear in my manifesto that if I was elected the Mayor of London, and I've got the huge privilege of being the Mayor of London, that I would freeze TfL fares for 4 years. And I've frozen TfL fares for 4 years, which means many Londoners will benefit, including your constituents.
So the answer is that, Mr Mayor, you have no intention of cutting the bus fares. That's correct, isn't it?
In addition to that...
Thank you. Right, that's fine. No, Mr Mayor, I don't want to waste my time or your time.
You can answer your own questions in your bedroom. You don't have to come to City Hall for that.
Just look in the mirror. What you have to understand, Mr Mayor, is although this is theatre, it's not a comedy programme, and by no way are you any kind of a comedian. But it is very clear then, Mr Mayor, and I'm surprised actually you haven't accused your predecessor Boris of having hacked your website to put it on there. But it's very clear on your website, your campaign website, that you will be reducing fares for the first year on buses. I've asked you the question twice you've avoided answering the question. So it's very clear to the people of London, Mr Mayor, that they cannot believe a word that you say or print when you're a candidate. So it's just more fake promises from a very weak mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah. Well, it's up to you to decide whether this is stand-up or not, Mr. Mayor.
Chairman,
Let's
the
assume
important point is for those students watching, that's not how you ask a question.
Well, I shall talk to him about that afterwards. Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Mayor, have you had meetings with the board of the Old Oak Common Development Corporation?
Can't remember, no.
No. Are you aware of the comments of some of the independent members of the Old Oak Common Development Corporation? One independent board member says that a 40% cut leaves the corporation with little opportunity to advance its key objectives. Another says we cannot perform as an effective development corporation without this minimum amount of work being funded by the original budget. And another refers to the scale of the cuts, meaning that they can't effectively carry on their work.
What are the
Do you accept, not a question yet, do you accept, Mr. Mayor, that perhaps you've made a mistake in cutting back from the original budget that was allocated, or the revised budget that was allocated to the Old Oak Common Development Corporation?
What are the date of those comments?
Those were December. They referred to those were post the £1 million contingency, but before your less than generous second £1 million of contingency.
No, listen, I can understand why you asked your question, but you're about 2 months out of date. I accepted and gave credit to Senator Bacon and his committee for the thorough way they asked these questions of me at the committee hearing. We had a robust discussion, and I was struck by the comments made in a constructive way. I considered the comments made in particular by Senator Member Bacon and came back with a change in my budget. He put to me, and he prayed in aid, the comments of the Chief Executive, who gave evidence to the committee. And one of the reasons for the chair of that committee, Senator Bacon, being so concerned was the Chief Executive was saying she was concerned. The good news is, since your out-of-date comments were reported to you, the Chief Executive has written and said, and I quote, "The additional contingency," that's the one I gave, "will future-proof the future delivery of the whole site," end quote.
Subsequent to the 2 million, of course, the National Housing Federation reckoned that it will affect the quantity of development on the Old Oak Common sites, and you'll be familiar with those quotes from the Housing Committee, because I understand your team wanted a transcript from that committee in order to find out what they said. So is your interest in housing expressed in this £2 million cut to the budget of the Old Oak Common Development Corporation?
Well, the good news is, unlike previously, OPDC will work closely with the New Homes for Londoners, where my expert team are bringing together housing, planning, funding and land powers to ensure effective and efficient delivery of thousands of new homes and jobs. And I've also written to the Transport Secretary in relation to what I think was a bad deal done by the previous mayor to make sure we get a better deal going forward. I'm confident that the additional monies I've given to OPDC as a consequence of the points made by the Budget Performance Committee and the Chair in particular will lead to the Chief Executive, as she said in her letter, being happy with that result. Listen, we've got to make the most of this piece of land. Some of it's short-term,
I'm sure we will make the most of this piece of land. Assembly Member Duval.
Mr Mayor, I was waiting a long time for Assembly Member Prince to say it, but there were also further savings to the people that travel on buses through your introduction of the hopper fare. Is that correct?
That is correct, and millions of Londoners are benefiting from the hopper fare, 2 for 1 within an hour. You can change a bus.
Do you not think that the credibility of the questioner should have been more if he had said, I've also asked government to do their part in the fare freeze, in actually freezing the fares that they're responsible for, rather than asking you to subsidise national government for their part of the bargaining with people who travel on public transport?
Well, I always admire the chutzpah of those guys, because whilst I've managed to freeze TfL fares for the next 4 years, by the way, their guy increased them by 42.7%, the government and the private train operating companies aren't willing to freeze their fares, which means travel cards, and the pay-as-you and the daily cap has not been frozen as I've managed to freeze it. The obvious question is, if I can freeze TfL years, bring in operating costs, why can't their government and these privatised train operating companies, whose side are they on? On the side of the private companies making huge profits, ripping off commuters, letting them down on a daily basis, or on the side of Londoners? And Keith Prince's constituents think I'm doing a great job, and they're probably thankful for the TfL fares freeze, for the Hopper fare, for the night tube. It's a shame Keith Prince isn't.
Ms Beck, can we turn to another subject? You said earlier on one of your budgets is going to contribute to the cultural industries issues, which is quite important in terms of the economy of London. Can you paint some more pictures of what that money is going to be spent on in this coming budget?
Firstly, thanks for your question on that issue. I mean, I think London is the cultural capital of the world. Not only is it richly rewarding to many of us, but it also brings huge benefits to our city economically. 1 out of 6 jobs in London are in the cultural and creative industries. 1 out of 8 jobs are in the nighttime economy. So it's really important we invest in this, and the pipeline's going forward. By the way, fixing the housing crisis, making transport cheaper helps them in the cultural sector as well. We've got to think about the pipeline going forward. So some examples of the work we're doing. The excellent Barking and Dagenham Council are working with me to have a feasibility study into London's first film studio for 20 years. We'll get a report back in April. We're doing work around the Creative Land Trust. One of the big issues is artists go to an area because the accommodation is cheap. They have studios there. The area is regenerated, but they're then priced out. We're looking at some of the best ideas from San Francisco have managed to make sure artists stay in an area, and so the Creative Land Trust's report should come back soon. We're also working with the Skills for Londoners Task Force, see if we train up today's youngsters to have the skills and talent for tomorrow. And this Sunday, of course, Oscars night, we have the UK premiere of The Salesman with the Oscar-winning director, Asghar Farhadi, who's also filming nominated for an Oscar this year, his film, this Sunday in Trafalgar, which will show the world that London is open and we are the cultural capital of the world.
And if we can go back to an earlier question in answer to, I think, Assembly Member Pidgeon, in terms of stability of police funding and the importance of the government announcement of their formula issues, am I right in thinking that in terms of what you've tried to do with this budget is try to keep it stable for any knocks that we may have in the future? Of course, we're all supportive of trying to get a better deal out of government, but can you just go back, and I think you mentioned, rightly so, and I think it needs to be, that one-off funding, one-off issues. I think we had a mini policing budget during your election, Mr. Mayor, period of, and we were told that was going to save policing forever, and it lasted only so far. Can you just elaborate further on that?
It's a really important question. You'll know from your experience of the Met Police Authority going forward, Len. Look, what you can't afford to do when it comes to the policing budget is play party politics with this, and that's an obvious temptation to use the buoyancy for 1 year. You'll be aware of a number of issues. Number one, as far as the police funding formula, the government wants to change that. The experts analysed the figures last year if the funding formula changed. London would lose between 170 and 700 million pounds going forward. On top of that, there's the national and international capital cities money. We get, roughly speaking, 170 million pounds versus the money we spend, 380 million pounds. On top of that, the previous mayor, in election year, cut the police precept for the council tax, and the current Home Secretary said we're being punished because of that. In those circumstances, if you were to have a one-off payment for 1 year for the police, the consequences of that could be in subsequent years you're having to freeze police recruits. I've not frozen that. We're still taking on new recruits. By the way, really important for a number of reasons. One, because the annual churn of 1,700 officers a year who retire. But also we've got to make our police service more diverse. We need more women, more black, Asian, minority ethnic police officers serving our cities. We can't stop the police recruitment going forward. So that's why my plans this year are the sensible ones. You can make a cheap point if you're a Tory Assembly member, but it actually means the average numbers of police officers this year in London is 31,300 higher than the average under the previous mayor. I make this point again, which is a really important point. The only time the previous mayor had more than 32,000 officers are when there was a Labour government, 2008, 9, 9, 10, or where 10, 11, where it was a Labour government giving the contribution or in Olympic year. Since Olympic year 2012, we've had fewer than 32,000 officers every year since then. So it's good for a Tory leaflet. It's 140 characters, so it fits a Tory tweet, but it doesn't recognise the complex needs of funding policing in London.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Apologies for lateness. Morning, Mr Mayor. One of the things that I wanted to highlight, and I'm not sure if my colleagues have touched on it this morning, is around congestion in London and some of the traffic. And I'm sure you've seen our report from the Transport Committee in London Stalling. One of the things I wanted to ask is, in looking at that and the fact that there are more cars on the road, I will confess I am a driver in London, and in terms of some of the charges on the road, do you think that we do need to look at a new model for road pricing?
Can I just say this, when you put about, confession you made about driving, if you look at the numbers using road space, 20% are delivery vehicles, internet buying. 12% of road space is private minicabs. So actually what you've got to be very careful of is, as we move private drivers off the road because of better public transport, a walking and cycling plan, giving them other alternatives, that space isn't filled up by more and more private minicabs or more delivery vans or vehicles and stuff. That's why we need a holistic and comprehensive plan, which is what we intend to do. So, thank you for your question. What we're going to do is, look, we're going to cut congestion and we've got to improve road reliability. Last year, I published, the first phase of that, which was the plan's specific measures to tackle congestion in London. Things like dealing with unplanned incidents, efficiency of the road network, communicating better, collaborating better with local authorities. On top of that, we're looking at how we can reduce the number of light goods, the delivery vehicles. We've got a separate taxi and private hire action plan to deal with the issue of private minicabs. By the way, I haven't got the powers to cap the number of private minicabs. I'm lobbying the government to get me those powers, but I've not got those powers. And the transport strategy Val Shawcross is working on will address some of those issues. The reason why I've appointed London's first ever full-time walking and cycling commissioner, Will Norman, is to address some of the issues going forward. And he's got a budget which is £2.1 billion in the business plan to address the issue of healthy streets. So it's a really big issue we've got to come back to again and again and again.
And I think that's really good. And you did touch on the delivery vans, and I think maybe all of us in this chamber have been guilty of ordering something via Amazon or online ordering for next day delivery.
Well, can I say this again? There's nothing wrong with that. The issue, because many of us work such long hours, and internet buying is now here. The issue is how we can make it environmentally friendly and use less congestion space. And one of the things Val's looked at is what other cities do in a sensible way, so we can learn from them.
So on that specific measure, do you have any specific plans? Because again, we've seen an 11% increase in some of the delivery van traffic in London. Any specific plans?
Yeah. So some of the things we're looking at is, and Val Shawcross can give you more details, it's an early stage yet, is could we have mini consolidation centres where there could be the sort of the vehicles that you're concerned about would go to the consolidation centres, and they could have other ways in a more environmentally friendly way, less road use space way, to get those parcels from the consolidation centres or the mini consolidation centres to places of work or people's home. It's not just a central London issue, it's also an out London issue as well. And consolidation centres for deliveries is one way forward. We're exploring all options. Nothing's off the table.
No, well, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr Mayor. We will now deliberate on your exciting proposals, and we'll have a 5-minute recess to prepare for that.
Thank you
you so much.
Thank you very much.
GLA, Chamber, Sound. 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 GLA, Chamber, sound.
Right, do sit down. The Assembly will now move to debate the Final Draft Consolidated Budget 2017-18. The Assembly is under a duty to consider the Final Draft Consolidated Budget and to approve it with or without amendment in accordance with paragraphs 8.3 and 7 of Schedule 6 of the GLA Act 1999. At the final draft budget stage, a two-thirds majority of members present and voting must vote in favour of a formal budget amendment in order for the amendment to be carried and to amend the final draft budget. Abstentions will not be counted. In accordance with Standing Order 6.6e, voting on formal budget amendments, and this is amendments only, will be by named vote. That means that each Assembly member present will be asked in alphabetical order how they wish to cast their vote for or against any formal budget amendments, or whether they wish to abstain. Now, where I'm proposing to do this, I'm proposing that we should have a single debate, but I shall call each amendment separately so that members know what it is. I really don't want lots of repetition. So the no, I don't want deviation, hesitation, or any of that either. Yep. And the first amendment I shall call will be in the name of Gareth Bacon.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. For the 8 years that he was in office as Mayor of London, Boris Johnson did not put up the council tax precept once. He froze it for 3 years, and then in cash terms he cut it in each of his last 5 years, not just the last year, and that led to a 28% real terms cut over the 8 years that he was in office. In addition to that, in real terms he froze all fares, not just TfL fares, in each of his last 3 years in office. And despite this, he managed to retain a budget for 32,000 police officers. The Fire Brigade produced its best performance statistics ever. He oversaw a boom in cycling in the city. Massive regeneration schemes were begun, and there was record investment in transport infrastructure. In his first budget as Mayor, Sadiq Khan has increased tax, cut the budget for police officers, run reserves into the ground, massively increased borrowing, and cancelled the funding of several major transport infrastructure projects. The contrast could not be starker. And as I outlined a month ago, what we have before us is a very new Labour budget. It's very flash, it's very smug, it's very pleased with itself. It's also full of smoke and mirrors. It's very short term, it's very unsustainable, and it's likely to lead to long-term problems. And our amendment will seek to correct some of this. Now, on policing, we made this argument before. We support the Mayor in his argument with the government that the Metropolitan Police should be adequately funded for the challenges it faces. London is a unique city in this country, and it should be funded accordingly. And Assemblymember O'Connell, as Chairman of the Police and Crime Committee, has written to the Home Secretary to make that clear. So I don't want there to be any doubt about that. But it should be noted that the Mayor is playing a very dangerous political game here. He's cut the funding that would allow him to meet his alleged target of 32,000 police officers, and he has done so before the outcome of the police funding formula review has been announced. Now, he's claimed that he retains the 32,000 officers target in line with the previous 8 years, but he has shown in this budget that he is not prepared to fund it. And as I put to the Deputy Mayor when she appeared in front of the Budget and Performance Committee, you might as well have a strategic target of 400,000. If you're not going to fund it, it's utterly meaningless. Because once you accept that you are not going to hit the strategic target, then inevitably the numbers will begin to tail away. And to attempt to argue with the government, as he has done, that he needs a high level of funding in order to maintain police officer numbers at the same time as cutting the budget that would provide them makes no sense at all. On the OPDC, as we outlined a month ago, there's been an extraordinary attempt to portray a 40% cut as an increase in the budget, which I think was, it was a sleight of hand go. It wasn't particularly good. It was like playing poker and having all the cards dealt to you and putting them down on the table face up before you even start betting. It was nonsense. Now, we know through the scrutiny process that this could prejudice the delivery of thousands of jobs and affordable homes in the long term, and it could have long-lasting consequences in an area that desperately needs redevelopment. It looks, as I said last month, like an attempt to settle old scores with Ed Lister, who obviously led Wandsworth Council when the young Sadiq Khan was cutting his teeth as a councillor there, and yet another attempt to trash his predecessor's record, rather than anything that's justifiable. On the Olympic precepts, as I outlined a month ago, pages 5 and 6 of his manifesto, he promised that he would recognise the cut in the Olympic precept and pass that on to the taxpayer. He has not done so, and I think he should be held accountable for that. If the Mayor is to stand by the words that were in his manifesto, then he should be today offering a cut in the precept of at least £8. The alternative would be to make the argument as to why he needs to retain it, and he's done neither. Staffing, as I've outlined ad nauseum now, forms the overwhelming majority of any budget. And as we pointed out last month, it's estimated that the Mayor is looking to recruit in excess of 100 people to City Hall, which would represent 1/8 of the current workforce and would entail needing new office space somewhere else. All of these people would be full-time with full benefits, including pensions and holidays and everything else. And the budget to provide for these people is what we are looking at today. The Mayor repeatedly refused to answer the question yet again today in terms of how many people he was planning on hiring, or indeed what the ballpark figure would be, and we think that that is completely unacceptable. Our amendment has not changed from last month, but I'll highlight the key parts of it. We will put the £38 million back into frontline policing to protect the strategic target of 32,000 police officers, and we will do this by cutting funding to other non-frontline elements of the policing budget. We would fully restore the £4.5 million cut to the OPDC budget, and we would do that by reducing the projected expansion in City Hall posts by 75, which would leave room for modest growth of around about 25 posts, whilst channeling the remaining money into protecting the delivery of jobs and affordable housing on the OPDC. We would abolish the remaining Olympic precept, and we will do this by removing, and I'm going to spend a bit of time on this, by removing what we consider to be, and we have considered for many years to be, one of the most unjustifiable perks ever seen in the public sector, which is the Transport for London nominee travel pass scheme. Now, to be clear, these are not the travel passes that are enjoyed by the staff of TfL, it's their nominees. And it cannot be right at a time when TfL needs to cut the fat and become self-financing by 2018 that it continues to offer a perk that is open not just to family members. We need to get that one out in the open. It's anybody else that lives in their house. It could be a flatmate, it could be a lodger, it could be someone they once met who's crashing there for a while. As long as their registered address is with that TfL staff member, they can get the nominee pass. There's one per TfL staff member. Now, it has been argued in the past that this benefit is contractual. It was shown under Boris Johnson's tenure that it was not. It has also been argued that the passes are vital because TfL staff work shifts, so their partners need to compensate for the upheaval that shift working has on their domestic lives. Interesting argument, but it's utter nonsense. For a start, not everyone at TfL works shifts, so I think we need to put that on the table. Secondly, if you're going to apply that logic, what about the partners of police officers, firefighters, ambulance staff, doctors, nurses? Why don't they get free nominee pass? These people work to keep us safe, but no one in their household is given free travel at taxpayers' expense. TfL have variously claimed that it costs nothing to provide the perk. Then they said it was around about 10 million. That was their language. Then they said it was between 5 and 7 million. The truth is they don't actually know because they've made no effort to find out, but we have made extensive efforts to find out. We have details not only of the number of these passes, but also of their usage. And the calculation, our conservative calculation, is contained within our budget. The net impact of our budget amendment would be a precept reduction of 3%, or in cash terms, £8.47 per year per Band D property, which we consider to be eminently affordable. So in conclusion, Mr Chairman, the Mayor's budget shows no sign of long-term sustainability. I said last month that it's the budget of a man who has no intention of being here in 4 years' time. I've heard nothing this morning that makes me deviate from that view. It's the budget of a man who wants to gain as much short-term attention and favourable coverage for himself as possible without a thought to the long-term consequences. As I said earlier, Mr Mayor, it's a very new Labour budget, and as with all new Labour budgets, there will be a long-term price to pay, but the price will be paid by someone else. The Conservative group do not think he should be allowed to get away with this, and our amendment, although we cannot correct all of the problems with this budget, we have attempted to correct the most egregious failures. So our budget amendment will protect frontline police officer numbers, protect the delivery of jobs and affordable housing on the OPDC, and prevent an unjustifiable continuation of the Olympic precept, honouring the commitment made by both the Mayor, the present Mayor and his predecessors. I therefore move the Conservative amendment.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Boff.
It's formally seconded.
All right. We now move on to the Green Amendment. Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. Our amendment, like our last one, has 4 parts. The Mayor hasn't formally taken up any of these urgent changes or set aside new funding in his updated budget for these things, so we're putting them all forwards again. They include support for a real public energy company for London, setting this up properly and quickly. When people across the city are receiving letters about price rises for energy, this is really vital. Cancelling road building and new pollution, and putting more urgency into getting healthy streets projects off the ground. Increasing the budget for community-led housing and supporting youth services. There was plenty of additional possible funding for all of these things. They're quite small things, they're quite valuable things, and there was the possibility of putting all this money in the new budget. Most of the amendments we're proposing is to take the money out of the capital programme reserve. This is now tens of millions of pounds more flush now than in the last draft of the budget. And this money is no good in reserve when real progress could be made with one-off investments now that build for our future. I want to say particularly how disappointed I am on the last issue of youth services that the Mayor hasn't taken up our proposal. I think not to use all the headroom in the council tax that he has, I think is an error that the Mayor should have corrected. He's never addressed to us the question of why he didn't put all the council tax increase he could into his plans for the police. Councils are doing what they can on youth services, but their budgets are so squeezed that they're still having to take money out, more than £30 million across London since 2011 at my last count. I went to visit some youth centres last week around London. One was closed, one was hanging in there, and my visit made the local council very nervous. Their officers came along to see me, and we talked about how we both recognise, actually, that they are genuinely stuck. Even for adult social care, councils everywhere just trying to make sure the most vulnerable people get their basic care needs covered. Councils are only allowed to put up the council tax a small amount this year to pay for that, and it's heartbreaking. But we do have this headroom, and the Mayor could have used it. My amendment will raise £4.3 million, and unfortunately my figures on this year's planned cuts to youth services across London keep growing. In my report at the end of last year, this year's upcoming cuts were only available from about a third of councils. More numbers are coming in all the time. So that in December I was talking about £3.6 million in cuts coming up. Now I'm up to £7.2 million being pulled out of youth services across London in the council's coming plans, and there's more still to come in. In City Hall we're not doing all we can to help with this vital issue, and that's what this amendment does. £4.3 million set aside to be used to boost the London Crime Prevention Fund and prevent some but not all of these cuts. I think it's not too much to ask. I hope we pass this amendment, obviously, but if we don't, I actually hope the Mayor does find some money for this, that he can put something more into the London Crime Prevention Fund anyway. And I know that young people are sending in messages about this, and no one who pays council tax has told me that they wouldn't be more than happy to pay 3p a week to make this difference. And it will make a difference. There's no real choice here. We have to do something to support young people. It's part of our strategic remit across London. On community-led housing, we again proposing to double the official budget in the Mayor's budget line there. We have a motion later on that will urge the Mayor to make sure that he spends that money effectively. Boroughs are very, very keen to get this new housing off the ground, and I know there are more groups of Londoners every day thinking about how they can do it. We are pushing at an open door if we can find money to create this effective hub to help Londoners and councils promote community-led housing. None of our budget is dramatic, it's effective, strategic spending. It would show real faith in Londoners if we amended the budget in this way, in our energy future, in healthy streets and air, in people who want to help solve the housing crisis in their own communities, and in our young people. So please vote for our amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell, to second.
Thank you. In seconding the Green Budget Amendment, I won't obviously repeat what Assembly Member Berry has already covered very fully. Obviously, I totally support increasing support for community-led housing and for London's youth services. I'm going to focus on the measures to speed up the creation of London's energy company and also investing in healthy streets and travel in outer London. So a fully licensed mayoral energy supply company would mean that the Mayor could sell green electricity directly to individual Londoners, businesses, schools and hospitals. It would be a competitive alternative to the Big Six, and it would generate the income that the Mayor could reinvest into renewable energy and schemes to cut fuel poverty. It would also create jobs and build skills in the energy sector here in London. But this morning, as Londoners are facing new steep Big Six price hikes, the Mayor hasn't clarified whether he'll fund this company or when the work will begin, as called for in our previous amendment. So far, the Mayor has only pledged £120,000 towards setting up his energy company. It's a fraction of what Bristol and Nottingham City Councils spent on setting up their projects, which were on a much smaller scale, smaller places than London, but far, far more ambitious, so they're actually getting the benefits for Bristol and for Nottingham. Unless the Mayor invests to get the Energy for Londoners set up properly, Londoners just won't get all the benefits that could be gained from this scheme, and this is why we are proposing an additional £1.5 million to be dedicated to the set-up phase of the Mayor's energy company, using funds from the Mayor's £67.9 million capital reserve programme, which Sian has already said, you know, it's not doing anything in that reserve programme, and it could be doing so much more for Londoners. But then moving on to the healthy streets side of things, the Mayor's been in post for nearly a year and very little has changed on our streets. People walking and cycling are still facing danger, injury and tragically death on our roads. We've recently had a spate of deaths of people walking and cycling, and we really need to make sure that our streets are places that are people-friendly and safe for Londoners who are getting around, particularly getting around under their own steam. And air pollution is rightly higher and higher on the agenda as more and more people are realising just how bad it is. So we propose that the Mayor should be investing much more in healthy streets and travel, particularly in outer London, to give people alternatives to using polluting cars and actually help to clean up the air. And as the Silvertown Tunnel proposals continue through the development consent order process, every day new research, new newspaper headlines are drawing attention to the devastating health costs of London's polluted air. It's a terrible time for the Mayor to be pressing ahead with the Silvertown Tunnel project, and it contradicts his claim to want to tackle pollution. The Mayor should have cancelled Silvertown Tunnel and any of his other plans for new road crossings in East London. And what we would want him to do is to use that £17 million and the 17,000 hours of TfL staff time that were allocated to Silvertown, to use those on developing healthy streets plans in all our outer boroughs, and along with doing a £100,000 study into the real needs of East London and the Thames Gateway for new transport links. It's just it's just a fraction of that £67.9 million that is sitting in his capital programme reserve. And we would also want to properly help those outer Londoners who are asking for better travel options than using a car. I was out in Enfield just recently and people were saying that in order to cross the North Circular they have to get in their car. It is ludicrous that people are being forced into car dependency, which is making our air pollution so much worse. Now the Mayor's got just 3 years left of his 4-year term, and his Walking and Cycling Commissioner is only now just taking up his post. So to speed up the pace, the Mayor must increase the budget for healthy streets significantly, and our budget amendment would help him to do this. I second the motion, and I hope Assembly members will support it.
Thank you very much. Budget-related motion. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, I'll be brief, both because the motion speaks for itself, and Assembly Member Bacon earlier this morning was kind enough to indicate that he believed that the motion would be passed. And also various members across the political spectrum have recognized that London is under-resourced in the funding it gets for its police service, not least when it comes to the national, international and capital city grant. It is accepted by the Home Office that London needs some £281 million in this respect and only gets £174 million. And we, of course, all know the Met has national responsibilities, anti-terrorism work, diplomatic protection. And in this post-Brexit times, it is even more important that if London is to genuinely remain open, that its citizens remain safe and secure. Changes to the police funding formula, as yet unknown, may not help. And the Met also has to find savings of some £380 million by 2020/2021. Let me make it clear what this motion is about. It's a plea for fairness and equity. It is not an attack on the government, but instead seeks to persuade it to do what is right for London and Londoners to live a safe and secure life. And again, I note what Assembly Member Bacon said earlier when indicated that he supported the Mayor's campaign for London to get a fair funding settlement. Various members have spoken about this individually. The Mayor has launched a campaign. The chair of the police committee, Assembly Member Steve O'Connell, has written to Minister Brendan Lewis. So what this motion does is to bring it all together and put on record a collective view as an assembly. And I hope everyone here can support it.
Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Yes, thank you. I'm delighted to second this important motion before us today. I am seriously concerned about the future funding for the Metropolitan Police. I've mentioned this morning, I think the Mayor possibly could be doing more and could be putting more money into that, and we can debate that. But I think over the years the Met could also do more, and colleagues will know, and previous colleagues of mine on the Assembly will recall, we've talked about chauffeur-driven cars and some of the first-class flats, first-class fares and apartments for senior officers. So there are some perks that I think could be taken away, and the waste we've seen on IT projects. But we face a very, very serious challenge going forward. The last meeting we had, Andrew Dismore and I put forward a motion about the issue of recovering full costs of policing football matches in the capital. And that's the sort of thing we need to be looking as well at to make sure we get as much money in. But when you look at things like the National, International and Capital City grant, look at that just alone. The Met Police think they need, I think it's about 345 million. They had an independent review with the Home Office and they agreed actually we think it's 281 million, but the Home Office only allocate 174 million. You know, it just does not make sense. And if that is under threat, as well as we've heard from the Mayor this morning, up to 700 million a year being cut with the funding formula review, that means an awful lot of police officers that will gradually reduce in London. Bernard Hogan-Howe has said crime is going to go up, police officer numbers will fall at a time when the population is increasing. It doesn't make sense. And, you know, I'm sure many of us will know there are huge challenges in the capital city, not only with the constant threat of terrorism, increase in things like knife crime and so on, but also the challenges we have are things like the huge bill we will face when President of the United States comes to our country, and we may well face a huge bill that Londoners will have to foot. So it's absolutely vital that we receive a fair deal from government, and for this reason I hope that this motion is passed unanimously and we all continue to make a strong case for London and the policing of our capital. Thank you.
Second budget-related motion, Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. This motion is also quite short and clear. It reflects that the Assembly, I think, is coming to a consensus in support of new community-led housing models. We've looked at it in the Housing Committee, we've talked about it here before, and I think we agree now it would help the Mayor's housing strategy. It would get more homes built more quickly, it would make more use of empty homes, it would help with taking on the small sites, the tricky ones on public land, and it would diversify who's providing new homes. We talked earlier, I talked earlier with the Mayor about whether or not he's putting more money in, how much, whether it's 1 million or 1.25 million. This motion isn't about numbers, it's about outcomes. What it asks for is reassurance from the Mayor that he will make sure his new community housing hub to help the boroughs, to help Londoners, is effective. It also puts on record this Assembly's support for these new models of housing provision, and I think that's really worth doing. I think community-led housing, whoever's idea it is suitable, not just for building homes, but for bringing all kinds of different buildings, different bits of land, different people into providing homes for Londoners. And I think it should appeal across all parties, and I think we should all claim this idea as the whole Assembly's idea and give it to the Mayor. It's something we recommend he does a lot more on, and he makes sure that what he does is effective, and that's what this motion asks for. Thank you.
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Assembly Member Berry, for putting down this motion, and thank you to the Mayor for listening to the Assembly and for putting in £250,000 into his budget for this community-led housing hub, which is really important because we need to be doing whatever we can across all forms of housing tenure in order to get up to the numbers of homes that we need to be building. It's fantastic that the Mayor has got this record affordable housing deal, £3.15 billion for affordable homes from the government, but we also need to be supporting community-led schemes. And we don't perform very well on this as a country compared to other countries such as Denmark and Germany, where there's a much stronger community-led housing movement in those countries. I've recently moved to the great borough of Lewisham, which has a very long and proud history of I'm sorry, Jeanette, South London. I'm not getting into this debate. A very long and proud history of innovative housing schemes, including some self-build council housing at On a Roke. And they continue to be innovative. There's the Rust Community Land Trust, which is going to be a custom-build community land trust providing affordable homes. In Haringey, there's a movement to have a community land trust on the St Anne's Hospital site. I want to see the Mayor supporting these schemes, which create affordable homes for ownership and genuinely affordable homes for rent. And what's important in particular is that they're affordable in perpetuity. I want to see the Mayor doing a lot more to support groups that want to set up community-led schemes. And also, I think we need to be pushing Transport for London to actually assist with sites. Now, it's difficult for community land trusts to be formed on TfL land because they've been very clear they're not going to sell freeholds. But it's quite possible we could have some cooperative housing set up on TfL sites. And I think we've done some good work on the Housing Committee, cross-party on this. We'll be publishing a report soon about TfL's land. I do think they need to up their game. Of course, they want to get the big sites out and develop to get the numbers. But parallel to that, should also be making land available to groups that want to set up community schemes.
Thank you very much. We now move to an open debate on all matters. At the end of that, I will ask the proposers of the amendments and the motions to sum up, and then we will take the voting. First speaker, Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I just say, look, in this budget, I think we've got a mayor who is willing to challenge and demand of the GLA family around efficiencies and effectiveness in the way that they spend money. Probably for the first time, TfL, those members opposite and I share the issue, the mayor calls it flabby, is for the first time being asked to account in terms of the way it spends its money. We may have differences about how the mayor spends its money, but how TfL, in terms of its budgets, examination of its budgets, I think this is a mayor who's going to get to grips with the issues that I think we on this Assembly have long advocated. Secondly, I think this is a mayor who's got to grips with two big issues. Air quality in London, undeniably, left 8 years, needed something stimulating to do something. He started to do it. I think he's correct in doing it, and this budget helps it and builds on this in terms of the future. And then I think the second big issue, housing. And he has had the support from, and we should recognise, from central government in terms of the funding that's been given. They've finally woken up about the housing crisis. We should now start to see some very sure results. In fact, this budget is building foundation stones in a steady but sure approach. Where I probably disagree with Councillor Bacon is I do think it is sustainable. And I do think on this side, we've got high expectations of more to come. More to come. More to come. And in addressing the two motions, I'm pleased that we've got all-party support across the areas on policing issues and sending a very strong message to those in power to actually, we need to think of a different solution about how they police the capital as well as our local policing, and think carefully before they make some mistakes that can't be recovered or have some consequences. I think on the other motion we will see, look, I think we can all agree, and I hope we can get unanimous support for the Green-sponsored motion. I think it's very worthy, it's a very important part of delivering some issues around the housing crisis, but it will be built incrementally in terms of building up the capacity and some of the pressures that come up. But we will, we on this side support that motion wholeheartedly, and we want to see this area grow over the coming years. Now, I just want to contrast the issues with the Conservative budget. I think in the past we've seen some very interesting Conservative budgets. I actually think you've done better budgets against your own mayor in the past with more detail and more resonance for change and arguing for change than you've done on this budget. Your 3% cut on the council tax is an interesting proposal, but I think if we learnt the lessons from last year, and I think a number of people need to learn the lessons from last year, what that cut in council tax did and what it did on the police precept and our subsequent grants. I come from being, as I've said before, a person who has cut council tax in another place in terms of a London borough. So in that sense, I'm not ideologically driven, whereas I think some of the members opposite, they feel they have to do it. I don't think this is a time to destabilise our services in strategic London. So we are in uncertain times. We have got a Chancellor's budget coming soon. We don't know what that's got and what the implications will be doing for us. On the 38 million that you put back into policing, it's all very well to say we're fine the cuts from back of our services or whatever, but I think you misunderstood what's happened when your man was on his watch on policing. We've taken out those support services. If anything, we need to make sure that they spend the money on some of those back of our services if we are going to face up to some of the challenges. The digital area is one that may be familiar with budget and performance members that have received reports on that, because it's only by that will we get some effective efficiency in terms of some of the policing models that we're seeking to advocate. So it will come as no surprise. We on this side will not be supporting both amendments being proposed today. And I do think we can't not comment about what's happening in other places and the impact it's having on our budgets and services to London and to Londoners. So, you know, in terms of the Conservative approach, in terms of the budget, I don't think it meets the challenges that Londoners face. I'm not going to use the word sustainable. I just don't think it really meets the requirement and the ambitions that we have to do in these uncertain times. Equally, I've got a comment about a government that actually a pound in our pocket is worth less
wind
today.
up now, please.
They're happy to see a second-class service for commuters, both in terms of fare issues, in terms of provision. I think a government that is having second thoughts on Crossrail 2, we might have to have another motion about that, because Crossrail 2 is part of the national
Could you do that on another
that
day,
delivers
please?
for us. So in that sense, in terms of these uncertain times, Chair, I don't think we can support these amendments. They don't fit. They're not fit for purpose in terms of what we face. And certainly, I think we're starting to see the beginnings of a sensible comeback in terms of investment, supporting our strategic services in London in a way that we haven't seen for the previous 8 years.
All right, okay. Thank you very much. Assemblymember Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a wonderful and interesting debate. Obviously, as UKIP, it's been our first debate and series of sessions on the Mayor's budget. We were only elected in May last year. There are lots of good things in the Mayor's budget, but there are a couple of things that do concern me, and one was the thing that I asked a question about earlier, which is there's no contingency for planning for an increase in interest rates. The era of cheap interest rates that we've had over the last 10 years on a global basis is coming to an end. And I think that he really needs to take account of that going forward. The other main thing that I don't think anyone has mentioned, or we've all missed, is that there's a lot of reliance on retained business rates. Now, we know, because it's been in the media in the last week or so, the catastrophic effects that the change in the way the business rates are going to be calculated will have on businesses all around London. Now, because of that, the budget takes a lot of that into account, and it has the figures there relate to the calculations and assumptions which have been made up to now. However, Parliament is debating that today, and a decision on the business rate structure will be made in Parliament later on today. If those figures that come from Parliament change all of the assumptions that we've made about business rates and the income that we're going to have, a lot of the budget, the things in the budget will have to be recalculated and re-amended. It's just an unfortunate question of timing. And for that reason, I'm afraid we can't support the budget as it is, because there are uncertain factors that may change the financial landscape of the world and the country. Now, let's talk about the couple of the amendments that we do have. The Conservatives' amendments, there's a lot of good things in there that we do agree with. I mean, giving an extra 4.5 million to the OPDC for investment in housing is a good thing. And cutting the new posts to City Hall, which will be a superfluous amount of spending, is bad. And reallocating that money is good. Abolishing the TfL nominee travel passes, that's another thing we agree with. But unfortunately, there's one thing that we don't agree with, and that's the cut in your budget to Travel Watch. Travel Watch is a statutory obligation of the London Assembly, and I think cutting that from £1.1 million to £100,000 will decimate Travel Watch, and that's something that I don't think that legally we could do, and it would be a very unfortunate reduction in the service that they give to customers in the London area. Your idea of reallocating £38 million of back office costs to frontline policing is good for frontline policing, and we do of course support your sentiments behind that of putting more money into sustaining the number of police officers. However, when in your budget it says that that will be got from transport costs, premises maintenance and supplies and services. Not sure how that is going to affect those services. It may be that looking into those things, that reallocating £38 million from those back office costs would actually cause unintended consequences to the operation of the police. So I will abstain on your motion, but unfortunately I can't support it because I don't agree with all of the things in it, although there are some good things in it there. As for the Green motion, there are a couple of things that we simply cannot support. £120,000 has been allocated for the Mayor's company Energy for London without a joule of energy being produced. Increasing that by 12 times, over 12 times, to £1.5 million, I think will be a waste of money. It's not in the remit of the Mayor to provide energy for London. The remit of the Mayor is policing, transport and fire emergency and housing predominantly. This would increase the remit of the Mayor beyond what he has a statutory obligation for. The Green motion also talks about the Silvertown Tunnel project being a bad thing for London. It's something that's absolutely necessary. If you've ever driven on the entry roads to the Blackwall Tunnel, there's huge congestion and that causes lots of pollution with cars idling. It's something that we do need, and the motion talks about a study into something that's already been decided, that we do need this tunnel and we do need extra road and rail crossings in East London. There's no need to spend more money in a study to what's already been decided.
If you
and
could
good decisions
conclude
which
now,
have been made.
please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Boff.
We certainly agree with many of the budget-related motions that have been put forward. In fact, all of them, I think, apart from the actual alternate budgets. And it's actually, you know, it's a bit of a secret we keep from everyone that actually the Assembly agrees on about 90% of the things that come in front of us. But if we agree too much, our party members start to wonder why they put us here. So here we go. I'm conscious that, and with the Green budget, we have an annual love affair with the Green Party, of course, and I'm conscious that there's members of the West Midlands Combined Authority here, and we treat, as Conservatives, the Green budget like we do West Bromwich Albion and Aston Villa. We admire the way they play, we just don't want them to score any goals. And so the honesty of your budget is always breathtaking and completely wrong. Let's move to our amendment. Of course, we've identified a number of areas which we think are important, but what we've ultimately tried to do is expose that we have a mayor who doesn't treat his job very seriously. He promised to increase housing during the election campaign by 80,000 a year. He's now dropped that promise and cut the budget of the largest regeneration project in Western Europe. Now, that's the budget you're supporting today. Cut the budget of the largest regeneration programme in Western Europe. You proud of that? Because we're not voting for it. But we promised to keep police numbers at 32,000 and then cut £38 million from the very budget that funds those police officers and then blame somebody else. He promises improvements in transport and that Londoners will pay no more in 2020 than they did in 2016. And then Londoners have seen increasing fares and have seen projects like the Sutton Tram extension got rid of. The mayor needs to start admitting when he's made a mistake. It's almost impossible to do. In fact, he doesn't even admit that his nomination of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party was a mistake. I don't think that's anything that the current members of the Assembly think wasn't a mistake. Let's face it. So what we've now got is a mayor who throws out the policies, throws out the promises, but when it comes to the time of delivery, and that is the budget, because this is where we resource those promises, he chickens out. He's not serious. This is all about presentation. This is all about hollow promises. And for as long as those promises are hollow, this group will expose them. And I just ask the people, the members of the Labour group, to ask themselves, are they going to look their voters in the eye and say, you know, housing's not that important, that's why we cut the budget on Old Oak Common. It's not really as important as we've been telling you at every election campaign. So let's make it an important subject. Let's fund Old Oak Common for the amount of money that it needs. And if any of you have acquainted yourselves with the comments of the independent board members of the Old Oak Common Development Corporation, you will be very familiar with the fact that those contingencies that are put in place are inadequate, much like the mayor who did it.
Assembly Member Russell.
I just want to speak briefly to in support of the budget-related motion on police funding proposed by Assemblymember Desai. We all know locally that our police are increasingly under pressure. Certainly in Islington, we're looking at rising youth violence, rising knife crime, and our police desperately need to be adequately funded. And then the issue of the capital city grant, reflecting our capital city status, protecting our diplomats, protecting us at making sure that national demonstrations are safe, and as Assemblymember Pigeon said, the Home Office independent report suggested that the police need 280 million. All they've got is 178 million. It is absolutely right that we press on this to make sure that they have the proper funding that they need. I met the mayor at the Women's March, and there were 100,000 people out on the streets in London in support of values of inclusion, dignity, respect and hope at the time of the inauguration of President Trump. Now, if we are expected to host a visit from President Trump, the quietest grandmothers are going to be out on the streets of London, and we need to make sure that we have the funding for our police force, that they are able to keep everyone safe in that case. So I fully support the motion.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Copley.
Thank you, Chair. Well, after Assemblymember Boff's intervention, I just wanted to say a little bit about affordable housing, because let's remind ourselves the Mayor got a record deal from the government, 3.15 billion, which is going to deliver 90,000 affordable homes, and has secured the return of homes at genuinely affordable social rent, which were of course abandoned under the previous Conservative government. There's going to be public money going into that. He's going to be delivering 10,000 starts on Transport for London land by 2020, of which 50% will be affordable. 50% will be affordable. And for the first time ever, he's not just said, I've got a 50% target, he's actually putting in place mechanisms in planning to achieve it. Even under Mayor Livingston, 50% was just an aspiration. There weren't any mechanisms put in place to actually get there. The Mayor is doing that with his affordable housing viability supplementary planning guidance. And I just wanted as well to say something about, on the Conservative budget amendment, on the scrapping of nominee passes, because actually Martin Hosick of Mayor Watch wrote a very good piece the other day on his blog. I don't know if anyone here read it, calling on the Conservatives to give up on this one, because for a start, it's not going to save £24 million. Their previous mayor, their previous mayor Boris Johnson said it would only save £5 to £7 million. But also, you know, taking away something like this, what's that going to do in terms of industrial relations? They like to claim they're the anti-strikes party, and yet they're putting in place a policy which is going to fly in the face of good relations with Transport for London staff. So, you know, they come up with this every year. I think it's voodoo money. It's not going to raise what they say it will, and it's not worth getting into that.
Assemblymember Pigeon.
Thank you very much. I just want to comment on the two amendments which I won't be supporting today. The Conservative one, once again, cutting council tax, I just think it's wrong. It's not the right time to be cutting it. We've heard from Assemblymember Duval the impact that will have on future funding. But, you know, I'm really passionate about putting more money into the police, and I thought that sounded like what the Conservatives were saying, but let's actually read it. They're concerned about the 38 million that's being taken out, which will mean the Mayor cannot reach 32,000 police officers. They think it's unacceptable. but they think they can fund it by taking money from elsewhere in the police budget to find that 38 million. It doesn't stack up. I know we're all creative in doing budget amendments. We've all done it for many years, I'm sure, as borough councillors as well as here, but this is pure fantasy. It does not stack up, and I think it's very disappointing to see that from the Conservative group. The cut to Travel Watch. Now, we all have at times had a go at Travel Watch. It's not reasonable. They cannot fulfil their statutory duties with a massive slash to their budget. Now, so I disagree with Assembly Member Copley, which is very rare, and staff nominee travel. It's something the Lib Dems had proposed way before I was on this Assembly, and I think it's a good thing to look at cutting that. But it's not just TfL staff that get that, it's board members. I'm not sure whether Assembly Member Bacon is aware of that. Board members also get this perk, not just free travel, which I think is reasonable potentially for them, but also for a member who also lives in their household. I think that sort of perk should be stopped. But then let me move on to the Green Budget. And I did say this last time. The job of the mayor is not to subsidise local government. Now, we all feel passionate about issues like youth services and the terrible cuts they've seen, but it's not the role of strategic London government to be bailing out local government. There's one thing supporting projects such as youth workers in accident and emergency units, which I have been advocating at that critical moment to turn them away from things like knife crime. But what next? Are we going to subsidise libraries? Are we subsidising leisure centres that we know are being cut across the capital? That is not our role. And whilst I understand hugely your sentiments and some of the other good things that you've put in here, it's not something I see as our role and something I can support. Finally, as we're doing all the motions together, the community housing motion I fully support and really look forward to seeing this develop over the next few years. Thank you.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Very much, Chair. I just thought I'd like to make a few comments about the Conservative budget amendment and their whole attitude this morning. I find this amendment to be a completely feeble attempt by the Conservatives in terms of providing real scrutiny. In fact, I think it was Assembly Member Duval who said they'd produced better budget amendments when the previous part-time guy was here. But my real problem with what they've been doing this morning and what they've been saying in the lead up to this budget discussion and debate is that it's actually completely cynical. And I've heard an awful lot this morning where people this morning are trying to divert attention from some of the real challenges that the Mayor is squaring up to in a very positive way. I think the particular cynicism in terms of their budget amendment for me is their opposition to the proposed expansion of the ultra-low emission zone and the introduction of the T-charge. If we unpick the conclusions that the Conservatives have come to, that the Mayor's plan fails a cost-benefit analysis, it really isn't hard to unpick those conclusions. We expose a willingness to put shameless political point scoring above the health interests of Londoners. We expose a willingness to pit the health of Londoners against the interests of a very small few people that the Conservatives think should be allowed to carry on polluting without any kind of restriction. We expose a willingness to overlook the need to protect very vulnerable Londoners, including our children, and avoid taking any decisive action on one of the greatest injustices of our time, which is now London's toxic air. It doesn't just affect London, but affects elsewhere. It's estimated that 10,000 Londoners die prematurely every year due to poor air quality, plus, of course, the numbers who are made sick by it and don't actually die. This is tragic and this is shameful. We are faced with a public health emergency. There is no choice now but to throw everything we have at tackling this crisis. And Londoners accept that. 81% of Londoners have given their support to the T-charge. Indeed, the need to take robust action is now so widely accepted that an editorial from the Evening Standard exclaimed in no uncertain terms that Mr Khan's proposed toxicity charge must be implemented. But this misguided attempt by the Conservatives, our colleagues on that side of the chamber, to undermine any effective action should come as no surprise. Boris Johnson had 8 years in this place, and they were 8 wasted years, particularly around air quality. In 2012, the World Health Organization deemed diesel to be carcinogenic. Did he take any effective action after that? Absolutely none whatsoever. In fact, he came to this place and he made jokes about busing in Norfolk school children to breathe in our beautiful clean air in London. Well, eventually that was followed very, very late by his proposals for an ultra-low emission zone, pieced together very much at the 11th hour. After 8 years of sitting on their hands, the Conservative group over there are now a little lost and completely unable to take a lead on this area. Back then, the Labour response to the proposals from the previous part-time mayor was to make the ultra-low emission zone bigger and better. In scrambling to find some kind of response to Mayor Khan's proposals in his budget, the best that you have come up with is delay and dilute. The problem for the Conservative group is that you feel forced to attack the Mayor's proposals in order to divert attention away from the fact that you are utterly devoid of any real solutions of your own. A breath of fresh air, which I made the absolute mistake of bothering to print out, is a report that we've had from the Conservatives presenting your so-called alternative. I can assure you that reading it is anything but a breath of fresh air. At the heart of it is the desire to go back to the much smaller ultra-low emission zone proposed by the previous guy, and to dress it up as ULEZ Plus by having a few pollution hotspots thrown in as some sort of smokescreen. Quick to complain that expanding the ULEZ to the North and South Circular will result in only a 10% improvement in air quality, the Conservatives clearly think that this is a health benefit not worth any pain for London's economy. But 10% when you're talking about a large swathe of London's population is a very considerable improvement. You appear willing to shun the 3.8 million Londoners who will benefit, instead only backing the 136,000 people who live in the much smaller current congestion zone. Sadiq Khan did make a promise to be a mayor for all Londoners, and that is exactly what he's doing on air quality. Members opposite
thanks very much. That's a jolly good note to finish on.
Members opposite seem to think that clean air is something for the privileged few. Let me tell you now, you are on the wrong side of history. This is a matter of equality, and you should support the mayor and his budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. There are no more speakers in the open debate. No, Amesh, you were due to speak first in any event, in summing up. Do you want to speak twice?
Something else.
Well, you can.
It's not about motions.
But I would still, and then I will be calling you next anyway. Right. So why not roll them together?
Okay, fine.
Assembly Member Desai.
I'm glad that there have been indications from colleagues that the motion regarding London's safety and for a fair funding settlement will get unanimous support. But regarding the amendments, I'm afraid, and Assembly Member Boff has reminded us of our duty to our party members. Sometimes we do have to oppose, well, many times I would say, with the opposition set across the room from me. But I really want to address the issue of the amendment which attacks the mayor for putting up the policing precept. We are told that by the Conservatives that they won't do this, and instead they would find £38 million of savings from non-staff revenue streams. Fine, but tell us how. It's no good just saying that you're going to find the savings from transport costs, from premises maintenance, and supplies and services, and that you'll put £38 million back into the budget. We need precise details. It's not just good enough to be so general. We need specifics, and unfortunately, we are not getting that from the Conservatives. But also, let's get some facts down. When Boris Johnson failed to put up the precept and instead cut it by 3.24%, the government cut London's policing budget by £22 billion. This mayor has had to clean up that mess left by the outgoing mayor. The increase in the precept is to start making up the shortfall in funding. So let's get some facts clearly set out. The government plainly takes London's failure to realistically fund its police service as a sign of the importance, or lack of it, of policing to us. If they're not going to fund it, they certainly won't. And this thinking will, of course, translate across to their thinking when it comes to the national, international, and capital city grants and the funding formula. It is important that we set example by putting our money where our mouth is. We are also told by the Conservatives and they attack the mayor for taking out £38 million from the staffing budget. This is because we will not have 32,000 police officers this year. The Mayor has been very clear about that. It is not possible to hire that many officers this year. So putting the money in for them doesn't matter. It will not be used. What this Mayor has done is to recognize the reality of the situation that the Metropolitan Police face. He is raising the policing precept and also positively campaigning to ensure a fair funding settlement, something for which he has all party support. I believe he will have all party support when the motions are put to us. It is a shame that the amendment around the policing precept in particular goes against their spirit. So I oppose both amendments, and in particular the amendment attacking the Mayor for putting up the policing precept. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now called Assembly Member Berry. Do you think you could please roll both of your speeches into one?
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to Assembly members for describing our proposals as both honest and worthy, at least, even if you don't agree with them. It's also our first budget process. We have worked quite hard to get to grips with what the process is, and of course we stand on the shoulders of giants in the form of Jenny Jones and Darren Johnson, whose previous amendment proposals and previous work developing policy actually helped us to put these things together. Sad that nobody seems willing to vote for them. I cannot, I'm afraid, vote for the Conservative motion, again, because it cuts the council tax. It doesn't just not increase it, it cuts it back. And I think that's completely the wrong thing to do, especially when you're taking money out of both the police budget and the Mayor's strategic budget, which I think in a changing world we need actually more than ever. I'd rather the Mayor was doing more in the GLA budget there rather than less. I don't agree with Assembly Member Pigeon. I think the Mayor's remit is public safety, and the youth workers themselves who work in A&E are very clear that once they've done their work with the young people, convince them to make a change at the teachable moment, they get to work with them for about a month, and then they have to pass them on to general youth services. They have to make referrals, and they are finding this more and more difficult. I think not investing in our young people, cutting back on the services, letting that happen across London is the ultimate false economy when public safety, safety of young people is our remit here in the GLA. I just wanted to say the policing motion, it has my full support. We do need to be treated fairly, especially when our police service is so hard pressed and their work is so critical to the whole country. So I'll be voting for that enthusiastically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Bacon.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll respond to some of the things that I've heard from other members around the table today. Assembly Member Desai talked about, he wanted a detail about how we're going to put an extra £38 million into the budget for the policing numbers. Well, of course, we're not. That's not the argument we're making. We're arguing that they should move the money around within the existing policing budget. And in a budget of £3.2 billion, 38 million amounts to 1.19%, and we would actually challenge anybody who can't make those numbers work. 1.19% of 3.2 billion is not a large number. It can absolutely be achieved. We had a very strident attack from Assemblymember Cooper, which was interesting. It's the first time I've seen her in such an angry attack mode, where she talked about the T-charge and the ULEZ expansion at length. Well, none of that was relevant, because none of that was anything to do with the amendment that we've put before the Assembly today. So, whilst it was strident and entertaining, it's completely and utterly irrelevant to the debate that we're having. We can have that debate, of course we can, but we can do it somewhere else, because it was nothing to do with the numbers or the amendment that we put on the table. We've heard both from her and from Assemblymember Duval and from Assemblymember Cooper and from the Mayor himself earlier this morning, although I will exempt him from my later comment. Much about the heinous crime of the previous Mayor cutting the precept last year in an election year. Well, that would stack up, wouldn't it? It would stack up. Absolutely fine. You can make that argument. It's very, very principled. No problem. As long as you put an amendment yourself. Where was the Labour Party amendment? Assemblymember Cooper told us that our amendment was feeble. Well, I'll tell you what feeble is, Mr Chairman. Not putting an amendment for 2 successive years, even in opposition to a Conservative Mayor. That is feeble. All of them sitting there need to look at themselves in the mirror on that one. In terms of other things that other members said, Assemblymember Pigeon said that cutting council tax is not the right time. Well, it never is if you're on the left, is it? It's never the right time to cut tax. It's always an excuse to put tax up. Assemblymember Curtin talked about Travel Watch being a statutory obligation. We agree, it is. but the funding for it is not statutory. We just have to provide some money for it. It doesn't say how much money. We've checked this out before. We've done this many times. And the reason that we would withdraw the money, the £1 million from it, is because we feel that a lot of the work that they do is either duplicating what the Transport Committee is doing here or could be done by the Transport Committee. And as I said in my summing up a month ago, we have great faith in Assemblymember Pidgeon and how she chairs the committee, and we think that actually she should be able to do that. Assemblymember Boff talked about the many mistakes of Sadiq Khan, and one of them that I had to pick up on was when he mentioned nominating Jeremy Corbyn for the Labour leadership, and he cited that as a terrible mistake. Of course, it wasn't a terrible mistake. It was a monumental achievement for the benefit of the whole country, because it will keep the Labour Party out of power for many years to come, and we're very, very pleased with that. Hashtag Tories for Corbyn, we're very up for that. In terms of the amendments, I'll go with the motions first, actually. The policing motion proposed by Assemblymember Desai and seconded by Assemblymember Pidgeon, as I outlined to the Mayor earlier on, of course, we are very pleased to support that. London is a very different city to any other city in this country. It is an international city. It's the capital of the country. It is, of course, a city that requires completely different policing and has completely different policing to anywhere else. And it is vitally important that it is properly funded, and we will be supporting that motion, and I hope that it goes through unanimously. Assemblymember Berry's motion, we've made similar arguments in the past, and I think we might disagree about some of the specifics, but I think the destination of travel, there is general agreement on this. As Assemblymember Boff said, 90% of the stuff that we discuss in this place we do agree on. We tend to zero in on the 10% because it makes good theatre. But we will be supporting this, and hopefully this will lead to some change going forward. In terms of the amendment from the Green Group, obviously point 1 is about the community-led housing, so we're in agreement with that. The second bullet point, again, I slightly disagree with Assemblymember Pidgeon because I do think that there might be a role for the Mayor here, working in partnership with local boroughs, but I wouldn't be prepared to support it by increasing the precept. And I disagree fundamentally with the Greens, no surprise to them, I'm sure, and I do completely agree with the comments made by Assemblymember Curtin about the importance of the Silvertown Tunnel project, so on that basis we can't support the amendment, which just leaves us with the Conservative amendment, and unsurprisingly we will be voting for that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I now will put each amendment to the vote, and that will be a named vote, and the roll call will be conducted by the clerk. So initially, I put the amendment to you in the name of Assemblymember Bacon.
Thank you, Chairman. Asking members if they're voting for, against or abstaining on, as the Chairman said, the budget amendment in the name of Assemblymember Bacon, starting with Assemblymember Bacon.
4.
Assemblymember Badenoch.
4.
Assemblymember Bailey.
4.
Assemblymember Berry. Assemblymember Boff.
4.
Assemblymember Cooper.
Against.
Assemblymember Copley.
Against.
Assemblymember Desai.
Against.
Assemblymember Devonish.
4.
Assemblymember Dismal. Assemblymember Duval.
Against.
Assemblymember Eshalomi.
Against.
Assemblymember Gavron.
Against.
Assemblymember Curtin. Assemblymember McCartney.
Against.
Assemblymember O'Connell.
4.
Assemblymember Pidgeon.
Against.
Assemblymember Prince.
4.
Assemblymember Russell.
Against.
Assemblymember Dr Sahota.
Against.
Assemblymember Shah.
Against.
Assemblymember Dr Twycross.
Against.
Assemblymember Whittle.
Abstain.
Assemblymember Arnold.
Against.
Assemblymember Arbour, Chairman.
4.
8 in favour, 15 against, 2 abstentions.
18 in favour?
Marvellous. That's
8
great news.
in
8.
favour.
18, yeah.
I now put the amendment in the name of Assemblymember Berry.
Against.
Thank you, Chairman. Starting with Assemblymember Bacon.
The amendment, you mean the motion, Chairman?
No, the amendment.
The amendment, against.
Assemblymember Badenoch.
Against.
Assemblymember Bailey.
Against.
Assemblymember Berry. Assemblymember Boff.
Against.
Assemblymember Cooper.
Against.
Assemblymember Copley.
Against.
Assemblymember Desai.
Oh, sorry, against.
Assemblymember Devonish.
Against.
Assemblymember Dismal. Assemblymember Duval.
Against.
Assemblymember Eshalomi.
Against.
Assemblymember Gavron.
Against.
Assemblymember Curtin.
Against.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Against.
Assemblymember O'Connell.
Against.
Assemblymember Pigeon.
Against.
Assemblymember Prince.
Against.
Assemblymember Russell. Assemblymember Dr Sahota.
Against.
Assemblymember Shah.
Against.
Dr Twycross.
Against.
Assemblymember Whistle. Assemblymember Arnold.
Against.
Against.
That's 2 in favour, 23 against.
Can I confirm that there are no further amendments? Thank you very much. No formal budget amendment has attracted the requisite 2/3 majority of votes. So we will now move to the voting on the budget-related motions. I'll put the substantive motion to the Assembly at the end of the meeting. The first budget-related motion in the name of Assemblymember Desai. Those in favour?
Unanimous, Chair.
Budget-related motion in the name of Assemblymember Berry. Those in favour, please show.
23 in favour, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much.
Don't know if you'll
Yes, I didn't ask. Those against? They're abstaining. Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any further budget-related motions? No. Right, I now put the substantive motion to the vote that the Assembly approve the final draft consolidated budget for 2017-18 without amendment. Okay, those in favour?
No, I need a vote on it.
We're going to vote. Okay. Those of you who do not wish to approve the final draft consolidated budget for 2017-18, which has not been amended, please show.
Those who do not wish to approve.
I'm reading it. I'm reading it.
To approve the final.
Do not wish to approve.
No, okay.
That's 13, Chair.
Okay. Those in favour of the budget. Right, thank you.
12.
We finally got there. Thank you. Now then.
Folk.
All right. Now then. Which one? Right. The substantive motion before the Assembly was not agreed. However, as no budget amendments have been agreed, the Assembly is deemed by paragraph 8.5 of Schedule 6 to the GLA Act 1999 to have approved the final draft consolidated budget without amendment. Yep. And that concludes the Assembly's consideration of the final draft consolidated budget. And now can I please ask you to go to item 5, which is to note the Mayor's report covering the period from the 5th of January to the 6th of February. Agreed. Thank you very much. Can I ask you please to note that the written answers to all questions submitted to this meeting under the MQT procedure will be provided by the 27th of February. Noted. Thank you. Can I ask you please to agree to use the plenary meeting on the 8th of March to hold a question and answer session with the Chief Executive and Chief Finance Officer of the OPDC? Agreed. Thank you. Will you please note that the next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Wednesday the 8th of March 2017 here in the Chamber. Thank you. Can I please remind you of People's Question Time, which is
On the 2nd of March. On the 2nd of March. Is it? 2nd of March in Sutton.
On the 2nd of March in Sutton. We're very anxious that as many of you get there as possible. Can I also remind you, please, that we are meeting our colleagues from the West Midlands at 1:30 in the London living room. Right, that's the end of the meeting. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Chairman, your testimony.
Was it?